Well, hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning in to News 9 Live. I'm Kabir Naqvi. Over the next couple of minutes, the global headlines, that's something that we're going to be covering. We've got a long list of headlines for you to go through. Of course, we're going to be talking about Libya. And when we're talking about Libya, we have to talk about Morocco. And whilst we're, right there, we'll touch upon some other Middle Eastern stories as well. Apart from that, there's a lot of speculation about China's defense minister being missing from public view over the last 2 weeks. The United States says that Beijing has put the defense minister under probe. Details coming on that. On the other hand, it's not going to be, Wang Yi, who's going to be attending the United Nations General Assembly meet. It's going to be Chinese Vice President instead, who's also going to be setting the stage for a potential visit by Xi Jinping as well. But that's not all, ladies and gentlemen. Zelensky is also slated to visit the United States as the Congress is mulling Ukraine aid. On the other hand, you've got, Kim Jong-un, who was in Russia. He went to that sanctioned jet plane factory and inspected a lot of planes over there as well. Visuals of that coming on your screens next. And also looking at Detroit. And when we're looking at Detroit, ladies and gentlemen, the strikes over there in Detroit, we must focus on that as well. But let's quickly begin. Let's talk about Libya's flood ravaged Derna. In grisly hunt for thousands that are still missing, ladies and gentlemen. Emergency teams on Friday kept up their search for the thousands still posted as missing from the tsunami-seized flash flood that swept the Libyan port city of Derna, killing at least 4,000 people. The enormous surge of water burst two upstream dams late on Sunday and reduced Derna to an apocalyptic wasteland where the entire city and the entire city blocks and the untold numbers of people were washed into the Mediterranean. The spate of destruction on your screens. Now, it's important to note that calling the situation catastrophic, the United Nations launched an appeal for more than $71 million to respond to the most urgent needs of 250,000 people targeted out of the 884,000 people estimated to be in need. Various reports that are coming out of Derna say that central neighborhoods on either side of the river, which normally dries up at this time of the year, looked as if a steam roller had passed right through, uprooting trees and buildings and hurling vehicles onto the port's breakwaters. What we're also learning is that within seconds, the water level suddenly rose, as many of the eyewitnesses have recounted. Even as people started getting injured, many of them have lost their lives. That toll now nearly 4,000. One eyewitness said that he was swept away with his mother in the late night ordeal before they both managed to scramble onto an empty building downstream. People who are recounting the late night ordeal say that the water was rising until they got to the 4th floor, and the water was up to the 2nd floor as well. Testimonies coming out from hospital beds, each sadder than the other. They say they could hear screams from the windows, and they saw cars and bodies being carried away by the water. It lasted for about an hour or an hour and a half, but for them, it felt like eternity. An eternity full of hell. Take a look at this, a 7-meter wave, hundreds of body bags that were now in line in Derna's mud-caked streets, even as you're looking at satellite visuals, awaiting mass burials, and the families as traumatized and grieving residents searching for mangled buildings for missing loved ones, and the bulldozers clearing streets full of debris and mountains of sand. Look at that before-after of the satellite image. Take a look at it once again, but you can see the spate of the cars, the mud, The mountains of sand and the bulldozers still trying to clear streets full of debris and mountains of sand. In one of the shattered homes, a rescue team pumped out the water to reveal a woman's lifeless arms still clutching her dead child. The disaster certainly has been violent and brutal. According to the head of the Libya delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross, which had a team in Derna, when the flood waters hit, the situation suddenly became violent and brutal. A wave of 7 meters, that's 23 feet, a wave of 7 meters high wiped out buildings and washed infrastructure into the sea. Now family members are missing. Dead bodies are washing back up on the shore and homes have been left destroyed. Now, in the Chiha neighborhood, which was spared by the wall of water that devastated lower lying districts, estimates that at least a tenth of the city's population of 1 lakh were killed. Many have lost their friends, many their loved ones. They're all buried, either buried under the mud or got swept out to the sea by the flood waters. Now, the floods were caused by hurricane-strength storm Daniel, compounded by the poor infrastructure in Libya, which was plunged into turmoil after a NATO-backed uprising toppled and killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Libya is now divided between two rival authorities, the UN-backed internationally recognized government in Tripoli and an administration based in the disaster-hit east. But there's a sea corridor that one has to look at as well. The UN Met Organization chief, Petteri Talas, says that many deaths could have been avoided if early warning and emergency management systems had functioned properly in the war-scarred country. With better coordination, they could have issued the warnings and the emergency management forces would have been able to carry out the evacuation of the people, and they could have avoided most of the human casualties, is what Talas noted. Access to Derna remains severely hampered as roads and bridges have been destroyed and power and phone lines have been cut in the wide areas, where at least 30,000 people are now homeless. The United Nations said that with the collapse of most of the roads, the municipality of Derna is urging relevant authorities to establish a sea corridor for emergency relief and evacuations. Climate experts have linked the disaster to the impacts of a heating planet combined with Libya's decaying infrastructure. Storm Daniel gathered strength during an unusually hot summer and earlier lashed Turkey, Bulgaria and Greece, flooding vast areas and killing at least 27 people. Storm Daniel is yet another lethal reminder of the catastrophic impact that a changing climate can have on our world. And fair justice on our part, ladies and gentlemen, because we have to talk about Morocco as well, where rescue teams stepped up on Wednesday, a massive effort in devastated Moroccan mountain villages as chances faded for finding survivors from last week's earthquake, which has killed nearly 3,000 people and left many thousands homeless. Vehicles packed with supplies were inching up winding mountain roads to deliver desperately needed food and tents to survivors of the nation's strongest quake on record and the deadliest in more than 6 decades. Smaller quakes are still rattling the disaster zone, and one sent stones falling in the village of Imintala, where a person was injured following the jolt. Search teams were still scouring the rubble for the living. Morocco is now well past the 72-hour window when rescues are considered most likely. Yet survivors, in some cases, are found well beyond that period as well. Morocco announced the launch of an aid program on Thursday to support the rehousing of the residents of about 50,000 buildings damaged in last week's devastating earthquake. The magnitude 6.8 earthquake, Morocco's strongest ever, has killed nearly 3,000 people and injured more than 5,600 since it hit last Friday in Al Haouz province, which is south of the tourist hub Marrakesh. Those left homeless will be provided with temporary shelter in structures designed to withstand cold and bad weather, or in reception sites equipped with all the necessary amenities. This, according to, is not yet known. But even as the rehousing and the entire aid project is being carried out, people are having to draw water from a well to transport it by their donkeys to the makeshift camp where they have been living since their village was destroyed in the massive earthquake that devastated southern Morocco last week. Living conditions in Ighermane, a remote village in the high Atlas Mountains, have always been rudimentary, but there was water in houses buried beneath. Oblay surveys the scale of the crisis facing the village. Now, Morocco announced the launch of an aid program on Thursday to support and rehouse the residents of about 50,000 buildings damaged in last week's devastating earthquake, the magnitude 6.8 earthquake. Again reiterating, Morocco's strongest ever has killed 3,000 people, injuring another 5,500. It said this would form the first stage of a program covering some 50,000 homes that had fully or partially collapsed in the quake. The number of people left without homes by the quake, which has devastated numerous entire villages in Morocco's Atlas Mountain region, is still not known. But the Royal Office says 1,40,000 dirhams, which is about $13,600 US, will be allocated for homes that were completely collapsed, in addition to the 80,000 dirhams that have been sanctioned to rebuild the partially collapsed structures. Some other news coming in from the United States, where the president's son, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was indicted on Thursday for illegally buying a gun when he was using drugs, casting a new shadow over his father's campaign for re-election next year. Hunter Biden, 53 years old, was charged with 2 counts of making false statements when claiming on forms required for the 2018 gun purchase that he was not using drugs illegally at the time. A third charge said that based on the false statements, he illegally possessed the gun during an 11-day period in October that year. Now, if convicted on all 3 felony charges, Biden could, in theory, face 25 years in prison, though in practice they are seldom punished by any jail time. In attesting that he was not an unlawful user of drugs when he bought the Colt Cobra revolver, Biden says knew that statement was false, and the Justice Department has said so as well. The Justice Department goes on to say that they're not believing Hunter Biden, essentially. Now, the indictment came 2 days after Republicans in the Congress opened an impeachment probe against Democrat Joe Biden, alleging that he was vice president when he benefited financially from his son's foreign business dealings. The legal troubles of Hunter Biden present a target for political rivals of his father, who is bidding for a second term in the White House. Hunter Biden is a Yale-trained lawyer and lobbyist turned artist, but his life has been marred by alcoholism and cracked cocaine addiction. Without offering any evidence, Republicans have accused Biden's Justice Department of protecting his son and have accused Weiss, a Republican appointee, of going easy on Hunter Biden. Representative James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky who will be leading the impeachment inquiry, welcomed the filing of the gun charges, calling it a very small start. Mountains of evidence reveals that Hunter Biden likely committed several felonies, and Americans expect the Justice Department to apply the law equally, is what Comer said. Now, twice impeached former President Donald Trump reacted on his Truth Social platform. This, the gun charge, is the only crime that Hunter Biden committed that does not implicate crooked Joe Biden, is what Donald Trump said. And whilst we're talking about the United States, let's also talk about what the United States thinks about China's defense minister, because the United States believes China's defense chief is under investigation by Beijing. The US government believes China's defense minister, Li Shangfu, is the subject of an investigation by Beijing and has been relieved of his duties, according to the Financial Times that reported the same on late Thursday, citing American officials. The report came shortly before high-ranking diplomat Rahm Emanuel, the US ambassador to Japan, stated on social media that Li hasn't been seen or heard from in 3 weeks and that the minister might have been placed under house arrest. It is the latest sign of potential turmoil in Beijing after Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang inexplicably disappeared and was ousted from his post in July. China also replaced the leadership of its rocket force, the army unit that oversees its nuclear arsenal, in July, with its former commander Li Yuchao, not seen in public for weeks before the change in official media, Xinhua giving no explanation for his removal as well. The Times reported that 3 US officials, as well as 2 people briefed on intelligence, said the United States determined Li Shangfu had been stripped of his duties as minister. It was not clear what made President Joe Biden's administration conclude that Li was under investigation. The White House has not publicly addressed the matter as well. Now, Li traveled to Russia in August to attend a security conference near Moscow on the 15th of August. 2 days later, the government of Belarus released handout photographs of Li meeting Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in Minsk. Li has refused to hold meetings with US counterparts until Washington lifts sanctions on him imposed by the then President Donald Trump in 2018 for his procurement of Russian military technology. The latest apparent removal of an elite Chinese official from public view led Ambassador Emmanuel Rahm, who has been openly critical of Chinese President Xi Jinping, to fuel speculation about the issue on the 7th of September and again 1 week later. President Xi's cabinet lineup is now resembling Agatha Christie's novel, and then there were none. First, Foreign Minister Qin Gang goes missing. Then the Rocket Force commander goes missing, and now Defense Minister Li Shangfu hasn't been seen in public for 2 weeks, is what Emmanuel Rahm posted on the microblogging website X last week, using the hashtag mystery in Beijing building. Now on Thursday, in another post on his official ambassador account that appeared to openly provoke the Xi government, he questioned whether Beijing authorities have restricted Li's movements. First, Defense Minister Li Shangfu hasn't been seen or heard from in 3 weeks. Second, he was a no-show for his trip to Vietnam, is what he wrote. And now, he's absent from his scheduled meeting with the Singaporean Chief of Navy because he was placed on house arrest. Might be getting crowded in there, is what he posted. Now, Emmanuel Rahm is a former White House chief of staff who earned a reputation in Washington for his ferocious style and hardball politics. The remarks come at a time of heightened trade and geopolitical tensions between Washington and Beijing. Meanwhile, maintaining our focus on China, in a move that has sparked another set of speculations, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng will attend the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The event was earlier supposed to be attended by China's top diplomat Wang Yi. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning confirmed the development, saying that Han will represent China in the event slated to take place on the 19th of September. Now, Han's visit to the United States is seen as a step towards a possible in-person attendance of Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the APEC, summit in San Francisco later this year. Well, we spoke about Russia, we spoke about the United States, we spoke about China. And in the middle of all of this, let's address the Ukrainian elephant in the room. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is expected at the White House and on Capitol Hill next week as he visits the United States during the United Nations General Assembly. Zelensky's trip comes as Congress is debating President Joe Biden's request to provide as much as $24 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine as it fights the Russian invasion. An administration official speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive visit said Zelensky will meet with Biden at the White House next Thursday. The trip to the Capitol was confirmed by 2 congressional aides granted anonymity to discuss the plans. The Ukrainian president made a wartime visit to Washington in December 2022 and delivered an impassioned address to a joint meeting of the Congress. At the time, it was his first known trip outside his country since Russia invaded in February of that year. Meanwhile, other geopolitical developments as well. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who was in Russia, visited a Russian military aviation factory on Friday following his summit with President Vladimir Putin, as the two countries, ostracized by the West, seek to deepen their ties. These are visuals of the leader visiting that sanctioned jet plane factory. Now, historical allies Russia and North Korea are both under rafts of global sanctions. Moscow for its Ukraine conflict, Pyongyang for its nuclear tests, with Kim's rare foreign visit sparking concern from Kyiv's allies over a possible arms deal. Now, Vladimir Putin, who has sought to strengthen alliances with other leaders shunned in Western capitals, met Kim on Wednesday at a spaceport in Russia's Far East. While Pyongyang wants Moscow's help to develop its missile program, United States officials and experts have said Russia is interested in buying North Korean ammunition to use in Ukraine. After their summit at the Vostochny Cosmodrome, Putin told reporters that he saw possibilities for military cooperation. Now, on Friday, Kim visited military and civil aviation plants in far eastern Komsomolsk-on-Amur, a key Russian engineering hub, Moscow said in a statement as well. Kim saw the production of Russia's Sukhoi Su-35 and Su-57 fighter aircraft and watched a Su-35 demonstration flight. According to the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov, who says, "We see the potential for cooperation both in the field of aircraft manufacturing and in other industries." He said this after accompanying Kim around those factories. This is especially important for achieving the tasks facing our countries to achieve technological sovereignty, the Trade and Industries Minister added. Now, Western countries have warned Moscow and Pyongyang against making an arms deal that would defy global sanctions. But that's not all. There's a bulletproof train tour. Kim is visiting Russia in his bulletproof train on his first official trip abroad since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. He left Pyongyang on Sunday and crossed their shared border on Tuesday. Kim's Far East visit will last a few more days, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed on Thursday. Now, Putin said on Wednesday that Kim would visit the port of Vladivostok to see the capabilities of Russia's Pacific Fleet. Kim is accompanied by a military-heavy entourage, while top Russian military officials were also involved in the Putin talks. Khabarovsk regional governor Mikhail Degtyarev, who joined Kim on the jet factory visit, said afterwards on Telegram, and he said, and I quote, "Today we stand together against the pressure of the collective West. Through joint efforts, both states will continue to defend the ideals of freedom and a multipolar world." I unquote. Now, Russia is facing unprecedented isolation from the West over Moscow's Ukraine offensive, with Putin seeking to boost Soviet-era alliances. Meanwhile, the United States consults Tokyo and Seoul on the same. The Kremlin confirmed on Thursday that Putin had accepted Kim's invitation to visit North Korea. It would be Putin's second trip to the country. He met Kim Jong II in Pyongyang in July 2000, shortly after becoming Russia's president. Now, the White House said on Thursday that U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had spoken with his Japanese and South Korean counterparts to discuss the Putin-Kim meeting. They noted that any arms exports from North Korea to Russia would directly violate multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions, including resolutions that Russia itself voted to adopt. A top Japanese government official said on Friday that Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was willing to meet Kim Jong-un without preconditions. Kishida had previously said he was ready to hold talks with Kim, but repeated invitation comes as regional concerns around Putin talks grow. Moving on, the United States Auto Workers' Union announced the start of a strike at the 3 factories just after midnight, and these factories belong to Ford. Just after midnight on Friday, as the deadline expired to reach a deal with employers on a new contract. The UAW stand-up strike begins at all the 3 of the big 3. The United Auto Workers' Union said in a post on social media platform X, adding that workers were striking at plants for General Motors, Stellantis and Ford, the big 3. Tonight, For the first time in our history, we will strike all three of the big three at once, the UAW president, Sean Fain, said in a webcast 2 hours before the midnight contract expiry at the three major automakers. Now, Fain also said that the union would strike at one plant at each company: a GM plant in Wentzville, Missouri, a Stellantis facility in Toledo, Ohio, and a Ford plant in Wayne, Michigan, but only the final assembly and paint operations. About 12,700 workers were walking off the job on Friday after the employers and the union, which represents about 150,000 workers, failed to reach a last-minute agreement. Fain has described the targeted strike as aimed to maximize pressure on the companies while negotiations continue. Now, Ford, which had complained about the UAW's slow response to its latest offer, received at 8 p.m. a counter-offer with what it called unsustainable terms. Ford has bargained in good faith in an effort to avoid a strike, is what the company said in a statement, adding that it remains absolutely committed to reaching an agreement that rewards our employees and protects Ford's ability to invest in the future as we move through industry-wide transformation towards electric vehicles. General Motors and Stellantis did not immediately comment. But on Thursday, General Motors upped its offer, lifting a proposed wage increase to 20%. The company had previously proposed an 18% rise, according to the UAW. Meanwhile, a prolonged conflict could prove bad news for President Joe Biden's re-election campaign, as voters are already unhappy about stubborn inflation. Visuals from Detroit. The big three of the three companies, Stellantis, General Motors and Ford. Workers gather at Ford, Michigan assembly plant for a strike. The U.S. Auto Workers Union, the UAW, announces a new strike after bid to reach a deal finally failed. Almost 12,700 people took to the streets, and the entirety of the employers, the entire group, stands at 150,000. Could mean and spell trouble for Joe Biden's re-election campaign. Well, now good news for Indians and the Chinese, because Myanmar is going to offer visas on arrival to Chinese and Indian tourists, according to its state media, as the ruling junta seeks to lure back foreign visitors and their cash. A start date for the one-year trial scheme will be announced soon, according to the global New Light of Myanmar, which is reported the same, citing the junta's immigration ministry. Holders of the visas will also be allowed to visit all sites apart from restricted areas for security concerns, according to the report in Thursday's newspaper. Now, currently, citizens of both countries must apply for a tourist visa online or at a Myanmar embassy. The military is struggling to crush opposition to its 2021 coup and has admitted there are swathes of the country it does not fully control. Countries such as the United States and Australia advise against all to travel to Myanmar due to the ongoing conflict. China and India, which both share long and porous borders with Myanmar, have maintained ties with the isolated generals since the coup. Now, the junta's tourism ministry is also working to attract travelers from Russia, another major ally and arms supplier. Earlier this month, the national carrier began direct flights to Russia's Novosibirsk, and the junta has said it is working to allow the use of Russia's Mir cards for direct payments. Now, Myanmar opened up to tourists in 2011 following decades of military rule, becoming popular with travelers. It closed its border during the coronavirus pandemic, and the military's coup and subsequent bloody crackdown on dissent have kept visitors away. But the economy has slumped, with the local kyat currency plunging against the dollar and rolling power outages roiling major cities where access to ATMs and foreign exchange counters is now patchy. And moving on to Colombia, where a seizure of nearly 3 tons of cocaine worth $100 million was held. Members of the Colombian Navy have seized nearly 3 tons of cocaine off the Caribbean island of San Andres, worth more than $100 million US, according to the Caribbean Naval Force Commander Hernando Enrique Matos. These are the visuals that you can see. Nearly 3 tons of cocaine that has been seized. The seizure is worth $100 million US. You can see the entire drug haul that you can see, the entire bust, nicely numbered, placed for everybody to see, hidden in containers that you can see. The Colombian Navy seizes nearly 3 tons of cocaine worth $100 million US. But if you think that wasn't mind-boggling, well then take a look at this. United States surgeons who transplanted a genetically modified pig kidney into a brain-dead patient announced on Thursday they had ended their experiment after a record-breaking 61 days. That's almost 2 months, ladies and gentlemen. The latest experimental procedure is part of a growing field of research aimed at advancing cross-species transplants, mainly testing the technique on bodies that have been donated for science. There are more than 103,000 people waiting for organ transplants in the United States, 88,000 of whom who need kidneys. We have learned a great deal throughout these past 2 months of close observation and analysis, and there is great reason to be hopeful for the future. This coming in from Robert Montgomery, the director of the New York University Langone Transplant Institute, who led the surgery back in July. It was the 5th so-called xenotransplant performed by Montgomery, who also carried out the world's first genetically modified pig kidney transplant in September 2021. Now, tissue collected during the study indicated that a mild rejection process had in fact begun, requiring intensification of immunosuppression medication. By knocking out the gene responsible for a biomolecule called alpha-gal, a prime target for roving human antibodies, the NYU Langone team were able to stop immediate rejection. The donor pig in this experiment came from a herd cultivated by Virginia-based biotech company Revivicor. The herd has also been approved by the Food and Drug Administration as a source of meat for people with hypersensitivity to the alpha-gal molecule, an allergy caused by some tick bites. These pigs are bred, not cloned, meaning the process can be more easily scaled. Early xenotransplantation research focused on harvesting organs from primates. For example, a baboon heart was transplanted into a newborn known as Baby Faye in 1984, but she survived only 20 days. Current efforts focus on pigs, which are thought to be ideal donors for humans because of their organ size, their rapid growth and large litters, and the fact they are already raised as a food source. Meanwhile, a scientific expedition discovered a field of underwater chimneys about 2,500 meters deep in the waters of the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. The Ministry of the Environment reported this Thursday. Now, this hydrothermal field awakens the curiosity of the world of science about the evolution and adaptation of species in extreme conditions, where life flourishes in the middle of hot springs and underwater volcanic chimneys, according to Minister Jose Davalos, which was in a newsletter that was put forth for public consumption. Now, the field is 1 hectare long and is made up of 5 chimneys and 3 hot springs, similar to those found in Yellowstone, the American National Park known for its geysers. Famous for its geysers, with 75% of the seabed still to be mapped, finding this new ventilation field shows how much we still have to learn about our planet. Now, organizer of the expedition said that he had set sail on August 13th aboard the ship Falcor. The thermal springs discovered in Galapagos emit water at a temperature of 288 degrees Celsius. Just to give you, a mark to compare, 100 degrees is boiling point. 288 degrees would be 188 degrees above the boiling point, more hotter than the boiling point, and are the habitat of several species as well, including Riftia worms, also known as giant worms. American and Ecuadorian scientists used an underwater drone to follow a group of lobsters that guided them to this underwater field. Along the way, they managed to spot a specimen of the rare squid, observed alive for the first time in 2005, and whose records are very scarce, that you can see on your screens, ladies and gentlemen. That it lives in very deep, very deep waters. The Galapagos Islands, which inspired British naturalist Charles Darwin's theory of a species' evolution in the 19th century, are classified by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site due to their unique fauna and flora in the world. In May, Ecuador obtained the reduction of approximately $1 million of external debt by committing to allocate $450 million to the protection of the Galapagos. Scientists discover hydrothermal vent field in Galapagos waters. Scientists have discovered this hydrothermal vent nearly 2,500 meters below the sea level, fissures on the seabed from which geothermally heated water discharges in the Pacific Ocean off Ecuador's Galapagos Islands. The field consists of 5 geyser-like chimneys and 3 hot springs and is larger than a professional soccer field, according to a statement released by the Schmidt Ocean Institute, which launched the expedition. Mind-boggling theories from down south, down below the water, to outside in the space realm. NASA announced on Thursday that studying UFOs requires new scientific techniques like advanced satellites and a shift in how we perceive unidentified flying objects. The space agency's findings come after a year-long study into UFOs. In a 33-page report, an independent team commissioned by NASA highlighted that the negative perception surrounding UFOs hinders data collection. However, NASA's involvement aims to reduce the stigma around what they term UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomena. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson stated that the agency aims to shift the conversation about UAPs from sensationalism to science. He emphasized that the panel found no evidence of UAPs having an extraterrestrial origin. While officials stressed the absence of evidence for UAPs being of extraterrestrial origin, Nelson acknowledged the vastness of the universe, with billions of stars in billions of galaxies, suggesting the possibility of another Earth-like existence.
I am announcing that NASA has appointed a NASA Director of UAP Research. They are being tasked with developing and overseeing the implementation of NASA's vision for UAP research. And it's in our DNA to explore and to ask why things are the way they are. In June of last year, NASA commissioned an independent study team to examine unidentified anomalous phenomena. We did so with a few goals in mind. First, to examine how NASA can use our expertise and instruments to study UAP from a scientific perspective. Second, shift the conversation about UAP from sensationalism to science. And to make sure that whatever we find or whatever we recommend, to make sure that information is shared transparently around the world.
Well, now, even as you're looking at these visuals, let me clarify that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, on Thursday released a new report on what it calls the unidentified anomalous phenomenon, better known to the public as unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. But it has come down on the Mexican lawmaker who presented alien bodies, saying that they were about 1,000 years old, which what you're seeing on your screens as well. What happened was essentially that alien bodies were presented inside the Mexican Congress. Mexican journalist and longtime UFO enthusiast Jamie Mawson showed politicians at the hearing on Tuesday 2 tiny bodies that you can see on your screens, displayed in cases with 3 fingers on each hand and elongated heads. Now, people are already calling this a fraud and a hoax, but this has opened doors for the conversations of the what if aspect of what happens beyond our solar system and our planetary experience. Meanwhile, the NASA and in its report during the press conference, NASA officials were also asked questions about the UFO hearing in Mexico's Congress that featured the presentation of alleged remains of non-human beings. David Spergel, the former head of Princeton University's astrophysics department and chair of the UAP report, said he did not know the nature of the samples but urged transparency. This is something that I have only seen on Twitter. When you have unusual things, you want to make the data public. So if carbon dating was exactly done on these 2 tiny bodies, do put it out in the public domain. But even as I say that, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, well, he said that if you think we're the only people in the solar system, well, you've got to be foolish and you've got to be kidding me. So the what if theory, it's still out there, but NASA not necessarily coming any close to Mawson's Mexican Congress revelations. And with that, it's a wrap on today's global headlines. Lots more coming right on the other side. This is Kabir Naqvi signing off. Keep watching News9 Live.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
The Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China withdraws, Pakistan military withdraws from Balochistan and give Baloch complete authority to decide for themselves.
The Baloch feel that if they don't act now, they will become marginalized.
What lies ahead for Balochistan?
Balochistan, Bangladesh 2.0, streaming now.